The philosophy of preparation. The Navy wanted officers who followed procedure. Eugene Flucky wanted something else. He wanted to survive. Survival, in submarine warfare, was not about doing things right. It was about having options when things went wrong. And things always went wrong. This was the lesson he'd learned on the Potomac at age 7, though he didn't have words for it then. The raft worked, but he'd also prepared to swim. Two options. Then, when his mother showed up, a third option being rescued. He hadn't planned for that one, but he'd accepted it when it appeared. In the submarine service, planning for rescue wasn't enough. You had to plan for every contingency, every failure mode, every possibility. Not because you were paranoid, though paranoia helped, but because the ocean didn't care about your plans. The ocean would do whatever it wanted. Your job was to have a response ready. Eugene's system was simple in concept, complex in execution. For every mission, calculate 47 alternative routes. Why 47? Not because there were always 47 possibilities. Because 47 was enough to force creative thinking. If you stopped at 10, you'd pick the obvious alternatives. If you forced yourself to 47, you had to imagine things that seemed impossible, ridiculous, insane. The insane options, Eugene discovered, were often the ones that worked. Route Category 1, the obvious. These were the routes the Navy manual recommended. Safe channels, charted waters, standard approaches. Eugene plotted them first, because sometimes the obvious answer was correct. But he never assumed it would be. Route Category 2, the difficult, these were the routes that required skill. Narrow passages, strong currents, marginal depths, the kind of navigation that kept you awake for 48 hours straight. Eugene plotted them second, because difficult was not the same as impossible, if the Japanese expected him to take the easy route. The difficult route became an advantage. Route Category 3, the hazardous. These were the routes marked unsurveyed or dangerous on the charts. Waters where the Navy had no data. Channels that might be blocked by rocks or mines. Passages that looked navigable on paper but could kill you if the charts were wrong. Eugene plotted them third, because hazardous didn't mean impassable. It meant unknown. And unknown worked both ways. If you didn't know what was there, neither did the enemy. Route Category 4, the impossible. These were the routes that defied logic. Water too shallow for a submarine to submerge. Passages too narrow for a 312-foot boat. Approaches that required surfacing in front of enemy guns. Eugene plotted them last, because impossible was just a word. It meant nobody has done this yet. It did not mean nobody can do this. His executive officer watched this process during the first patrol under Eugene's command. They were planning a mission into the East China Sea, standard hunting grounds, standard risks. Eugene spent 3 days on the charts, filling notebooks with calculations. "What are you looking for?" the XO finally asked. "Options," Eugene said without looking up. "We have options." The navigation officer plotted 6 routes. They're all approved by command. 6 routes is not options. 6 routes is a menu. Options are what you have when the menu stops applying. The XO didn't understand. He would, eventually. They all would. The first test, Formosa Strait. January 1944. They'd been on patrol for 12 days when the contact report came in. Japanese carrier group. 1 escort carrier, 3 destroyers, zigzagging at 18 knots. Eugene studied the plot. The carrier changed course every 4 minutes, a random pattern designed to defeat torpedo solutions. Standard doctrine said wait for better conditions. Hope the carrier made a mistake. Attack if opportunity presented. Standard doctrine was useless here. Eugene called his officers together. We're going to surface. Silence. Surface, sir. In daylight. In front of destroyers. Yes. We're going to run parallel to the carrier at flank speed. We'll let them see us. Then we'll crash dive. The officers exchanged glances. The XO spoke carefully. Sir, if we surface in front of destroyers, they'll attack. We'll be on the surface, exposed. They have guns. We have a deck gun that can't hit anything at that range. I know. Then why? Because right now, the carrier is zigzagging. We can't get a firing solution because we can't predict where it will be in for minutes. But if we surface, if they see us, they'll assume we're fleeing. They'll turn to pursue. When they turn, they'll stop zigzagging. And when they stop zigzagging, we'll have a firing solution. The logic was sound. The execution was insane. Eugene did it anyway. They surfaced at 1400 hours, in broad daylight, 8,000 yards from the nearest destroyer. Bob ran parallel to the carrier at flank speed 21 knots, maximum power. The Japanese saw them immediately. Destroyers turned to intercept. The carrier adjusted course to bring its aircraft into action. Exactly as Eugene predicted, the carrier stopped zigzagging. Crash dive. Eugene ordered. All ahead full. Set up torpedo solution on the carrier's current course and speed. Bar disappeared beneath the waves 90 seconds before the first destroyer reached their last known position, below the surface, in the silence of the deep. They tracked the carrier's predictable course, 6 torpedoes for hits. The carrier sank after. The battle. The XO asked the question that had been bothering him. How did you know they'd turn toward us? Instead of away. I didn't, Eugene said. But I knew what they'd assume. They'd assume any submarine commander with sense would run away from destroyers, not toward them. So when we surfaced, they thought we were desperate. They thought we'd made a mistake. They thought they had us. And if they'd been right, then we'd have died. But dying wasn't my preferred outcome, so I had 46 other routes ready if that one failed. The second test, Nanquan Harbor. September 1944. The China coast was lined with Japanese-held harbors anchorage after anchorage where cargo ships gathered at night, protected by mines, patrol boats, and coastal guns. Standard submarine doctrine said stay away. The water was too shallow, the defenses too thick, the risks too high. Eugene studied the charts and saw something else. The harbors were protected by minefields, yes. But the mines were moored tethered to the bottom by cables. Standard sonar couldn't detect the mines themselves, but it could detect the cables. Not clearly, not reliably, but enough. He spent 3 weeks developing a technique. Run at periscope depth. Use active sonar in short pulses. Listen for the characteristic ping of cable reflection. It wasn't in any manual. It probably wouldn't work. But if it did, on September 23, 1944, Bob approached Nanquan Harbor at midnight. The water was 60 feet deep, too shallow to dive if they got in trouble, too shallow to escape if they were detected. Eugene conned the boat through the minefield using his improvised cable detection technique. They penetrated the harbor. 30 ships at anchor. Eugene fired 8 torpedoes. 7 hit. 6 ships sank. Escaping was worse. They had to back up through the same minefield, in darkness, with coastal guns firing and patrol boats searching. Eugene had plotted 47 exit routes. He used the 43rd passage so narrow the charts showed it as impassable. They cleared the harbor at 03 hours. Behind them, the Japanese were still firing at empty water. His crew celebrated. Eugene sat in his cabin, updating his notebooks. The XO found him there at 04:00. "You should be celebrating with the men, Captain. In a minute. I need to document what worked and what didn't. If we don't learn from this, we're just lucky. And luck runs out. The philosophy of 47. Why 47 routes? Because the first 10 are easy. The next 10 require thought. The next 10 require creativity. The next 10 require imagination. The last 7 require you to question everything you believe about what's possible. By the time you've imagined 47 ways to solve a problem, you've stretched your mind past its comfortable limits. You've considered options that seemed insane, impossible, suicidal. And somewhere in that list of insane options, there's usually one that's actually viable. The Japanese assumed no submarine commander would be insane enough to enter their harbors. So they aimed their defenses at the sane approaches. Eugene's 47th route, the one that seemed most insane, was the one they never guarded. This wasn't genius. It was preparation. The crew as resource. Eugene's 47 route philosophy applied to people, too. Every sailor on Bob had skills the Navy had never bothered to catalogue. The Navy cared about ratings, torpedoman, electrician, machinist, not about the unique capabilities each man brought from civilian life. Eugene cared. He found a sailor who'd worked in a carnival, judging distances for the ball toss game. That man became his night surface attack spotter, able to estimate range to target within 50 yards, in darkness, without instruments. He found a farmer who could read weather from wave patterns. That man became his unofficial meteorologist, predicting storms and fog banks that gave them cover. He found a mechanic who could diagnose engine problems by sound. That man became his early warning system, able to hear bearing failures before they happened, cavitation before it became audible to enemy sonar. He found former Boy Scouts. He found marathon runners. He found men who'd grown up on boats, in forests, in cities where they'd learned to navigate by landmarks. And when he needed 8 men to paddle ashore in rubber boats, plant explosives on a Japanese railroad track, and return alive, he knew exactly who to pick. The question, every planning session ended the same way. Eugene would look at his officers and ask, "What haven't we considered?" They'd brainstorm. They'd list possibilities. They'd exhaust the obvious. Then Eugene would ask, "What haven't we considered that seems impossible?" Silence. Then someone would suggest something ridiculous. And somewhere in that ridiculous suggestion, there was usually a seed of something real. "What haven't we done yet?" became the unofficial motto of USS Bob. The answer, in June 1945, was, "We haven't invaded Japan." Eugene smiled. Probability, not luck. The Japanese called him Lucky Flocky. The nickname followed him from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay, attached to every report, every citation, every newspaper story about the submarine commander who couldn't seem to die. Eugene hated the nickname. Not because it wasn't flattering, it was. Not because it diminished his accomplishments, it did. But he didn't care about that. He hated it because it was wrong. Luck had nothing to do with it. What the Japanese saw as luck, Eugene saw as mathematics. The probability problem. Every military operation has a survival probability, The Navy's standard doctrine was designed to keep that probability above 80% safe margins, conservative tactics, minimal risk. Commanders who followed doctrine could expect to survive most missions, but survival wasn't Eugene's goal. Mission accomplishment was, and the missions that needed doing the ones that would actually hurt Japan had survival probabilities far below 80%. Entering Nanquan Harbor, 30% survival probability, by Eugene's calculation. Attacking the carrier group, 40%. Surfacing in front of destroyers, 25%. The train raid, 15%. Standard doctrine said, don't attempt missions below 50% probability. Too many good men would die. Eugene's math said something different. The multiplier effect. A single submarine could sink 1 ship per patrol, maybe 2. That was the standard expectation. At that rate, it would take 100 submarines and 10 years to strangle Japan's shipping lanes. But if a submarine could sink 6 ships per patrol, if it could penetrate harbors, destroy convoys, attack from inside the defensive perimeter, the multiplier effect changed everything. 1 aggressive submarine could do the work of 10 cautious ones. The math was simple. 10 submarines times 1 ship per patrol equals 10 ships. 1 submarine times 10 ships per patrol equals 10 ships. Same result, 1/10 the resources. But the aggressive submarine had a higher loss probability. That was the trade-off. Eugene calculated it differently. 10 cautious submarines would lose, on average, 1 boat per 20 patrols. Acceptable losses. 1 aggressive submarine, attempting missions with 30% survival probability, would almost certainly be lost within 5 patrols. But in those 5 patrols, the aggressive submarine would sink more ships than all 10 cautious submarines combined. And the crew, if they survived, would gain experience that no training could replicate. The math worked, but only if you understood probability. Probability versus certainty. The human brain is terrible at probability. We evolved to think in certainties. That saber-toothed tiger will eat me. That berry made my friend sick. That water is safe to drink. Probabilistic thinking, there's a 30% chance the tiger is hungry, is a recent invention, and we're still bad at it. Eugene trained himself to think probabilistically. Not in terms of will we survive, but what is our survival probability, and how can we change it? Every decision became an equation. Should we surface in daylight? Base survival probability, 20%. But if surfacing makes the carrier stop zigzagging, our torpedo hit probability increases from 10% to 80%. Multiply the numbers. 20% survival times 80% hit equals 16% overall mission success probability. Not great. But if we don't surface, we have 0% chance of hitting the carrier. So 16% is better than 0%. That was the calculation his officers never saw. They saw a crazy commander doing insane things. Eugene saw a spreadsheet. The 47 routes as probability management. The 47 routes weren't just contingency plans. They were probability multipliers. Each route represented a different way to approach the problem. By having 47 options, Eugene could pick the one that maximized survival probability under current conditions. But more importantly, he could switch routes when conditions changed. The Japanese would react, Eugene would recalculate. They'd adjust, he'd adjust faster. The 47 routes gave him flexibility, the ability to change plans in seconds, without hesitation, because he'd already thought through every possibility. Most commanders had one plan. If that plan failed, they had to improvise. Improvisation under pressure leads to mistakes. Mistakes get people killed. Eugene had 47 plans. If 46 fail, he still had one left. And that one, the 47th, the impossible one, was usually the one the Japanese never anticipated. The train raid probability. Let's do the math Eugene did in June 1945, as he planned the Toyama Bay raid. Variables: time to shore, for minutes. Probability of detection during transit, 20% moonless night. Calm sea. Experienced paddlers. Time on shore, 8 minutes. Probability of detection, 40% patrol schedules, telegraph lines, noise. Time to return, for minutes. Probability of detection, 20%. Train explosion probability, 90% of charges placed correctly. Escape probability after explosion, 30% coastal guns, searchlights, shallow water. Multiply probabilities, 0.8 times 0.6 times 0.8 times 0.9 times 0.3 equals 0.10368. 10.4% overall mission success probability. Standard doctrine said, don't attempt. Eugene looked at the numbers differently. 10.4% was low. Yes, but what was the alternative? Torpedoes couldn't hit the train. Aircraft couldn't reach this far north. The only way to stop that ammunition from reaching Japanese troops was to put men on the ground. 10.4% was better than 0%. But Eugene didn't stop there. He looked for ways to increase the probability. What if they landed closer to the tracks? What if they studied patrol patterns for 3 days instead of 1? What if they practiced in darkness until the movements were automatic? What if they cut the telegraph lines to delay response? What if they sent their fastest swimmer as a decoy? Each improvement added percentage points. By the time they launched, Eugene estimated the success probability at 22%. Still low. Still terrifying. But acceptable. The decoy calculation. The most brilliant part of the train raid wasn't the explosives. It was the math Eugene did about human behavior. When the Japanese patrol approached 75 yards away, smoking cigarettes. About to discover the sabotage, team motor machinist James Richard made a decision. He stood up and ran south, away from his team, drawing the patrol after him. Richard was the marathon runner. He'd calculated he could outrun Japanese soldiers for 90 seconds. But the real calculation was psychological. The patrol would chase a visible target rather than search for hidden ones. 1 man running was more compelling than 7 men hiding. Richard's action increased the team's survival probability from 15% to 60%. It decreased his own survival probability from 50% to 20%. He accepted that trade-off. Eugene didn't order Richard to do this. He couldn't have the situation developed too fast. But he'd created a crew culture where such decisions were possible. Richard knew his captain would understand. He knew the math would be respected. That was the secret of Bob. Not one brilliant commander, but 80 men who'd learned to think probabilistically. The probability of 0 Purple Hearts. Eugene's proudest accomplishment during his entire command, under the most intense combat conditions any submarine faced. Not one of his men received a Purple Heart. Not because they weren't wounded, they were, but because he brought them home. Every time. The probability of that, given the missions they attempted, was less than 1%. But probability isn't destiny. Eugene manipulated the variables. He trained his men relentlessly. He planned 47 routes. He thought in numbers while others thought in feelings. And when the numbers said impossible, he looked for ways to change the numbers. The Medal of Honor math. The official citation for Eugene's Medal of Honor describes the Nanquan Harbor raid, fully aware that a safe retirement would necessitate an hour's run at full speed through tea. He uncharted, mined, and rock-obstructed waters. He bravely ordered battle station torpedoes. What the citation doesn't say, Eugene had calculated that our long run 43 different ways. He knew every rock, every mine cable, every depth contour. He knew that at 21 knots, the boat would draw 18 feet, just enough to clear the bottom in 20-fathom water. He knew the Japanese would aim their guns at the deep channel, not the shallow one. He knew the patrol boats couldn't follow through the minefield. The brave decision was actually the calculated one. The probability of survival, 34%. The probability of mission success, 80%. The combined probability, 27%. Better than the alternative 0% chance of sinking those ships. The question of luck. After the war, a reporter asked Eugene about his nickname. "Were you really that lucky?" Eugene thought for a moment. "I'll tell you about luck. In 1943, we were depth charged for 12 hours. The Japanese dropped 42 charges. One exploded so close it cracked the pressure hull. By all rights, we should have died. But we didn't. That sounds like luck. No, that was preparation. We drilled silent running until it was automatic. We'd plotted the ocean floor so we could hide in thermal layers. We'd calculated the Japanese depth charge patterns and knew when they'd shift to a new search area. We survived because we were ready, not because we were lucky. But what about the times the Japanese shells missed? What about the patrol boats that turned away at the last second?" Eugene smiled. "Those were luck. But luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I prepared 47 routes. The opportunity showed up once. That's not luck. That's math." Toyama Bay, June 19, 1945. The water was black, not dark. Not deep blue dot black. The kind of black that absorbs light, swallows sound, makes you doubt whether your eyes are open or closed. The kind of black that existed before creation, before the first word, before God said, "Let there be light." 8 men into rubber boats paddled through that blackness toward a beach they couldn't see. Behind them, 950 yards offshore, USS Barb sat with engines idling. Water depth, 60 feet. Too shallow to submerge. If the Japanese discovered them now, there would be no crash dive, no silent escape, no survival. Just deck guns against coastal batteries, a submarine against an empire. E.T. Americans against 127 million Japanese. The math was simple. Eugene had done it 50 different ways. Every answer was the same. If discovered, everyone dies. But Eugene wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking about his men, 8 of them, paddling toward a railroad track with 55-pound satchel charges, heading into the only place no Allied combat troops had ever gone, the Japanese home islands. He watched through the periscope, watched the boats disappear into darkness, watched the seconds tick past on the chronometer. 4 minutes to shore, 8 minutes to plant charges, 4 minutes to return, 16 minutes total exposure. Japanese patrol patterns changed every 15 minutes. The margin, 1 minute. The selection. Eugene had chosen these 8 men carefully. Not the best sailors, the right ones. Paul Saunders, torpedoman, former carnival worker. Distance judgment in Dartmouth. He led the team. William Hatfield. Electrician's mate, former railroad worker. Understood tracks, understood explosives, understood pressure switches. He would wire the charge. James Richard, motor machinist, marathon runner, could outrun anyone on the island if things went wrong. 5 others: Francis Sever, Lawrence Newland, Edward Klinglesmith, John Markison, William Walker, each chosen for specific skills, former Boy Scouts. Men who'd never panicked under depth charge attack. Men with something to prove. Eugene's order. No married men. Not because married men were less brave. Because the mission had a 20% success probability, and Eugene refused to make widows unnecessarily the approach. Saunders paddled with his eyes fixed on the water. He wasn't looking at the beach too dark to see. He was looking at wave patterns, refraction angles, the way the surf broke against invisible obstacles. His carnival training had taught him to estimate distances with no references, to judge where things were by how they moved relative to other things. The beach should be 200 yards ahead, maybe 250. The waves were breaking differently here, shallower bottom, steeper slope. He adjusted course slightly port. Behind him, Hatfield checked the charge for the 10th time. 55 pounds of C4, wrapped in waterproofing, connected to a pressure switch he'd built from scrap. 3 dry cell batteries in a pickle can. Timing pencils backup. If the pressure switch failed, the pencils would detonate at 0-39 regardless. If they detonated early, Hatfield would be vaporized before he heard the sound. He checked the connections anyway. The landing, 227 hours. The rubber boats grounded on volcanic sand. 8 men spilled into waist-deep water, dragging the boats above the high tide line. Saunders checked his compass magnetic north, adjusted for local variation, verified against the stars he could barely see through cloud cover. The railroad tracks should be 40 yards inland, running parallel to the beach. They were 42 yards. Saunders had missed by 2 yards in total darkness, through unfamiliar terrain, after a 950-yard approach. His carnival boss would have been proud. Hatfield moved toward the tracks, the 55-pound charge slung across his back. The others spread out, lookouts facing inland, facing north, facing south. Silence. No voices, no lights, just hand signals and breathing. Problem 1. The tracks sat on an embankment, 6 feet above beach level, raised on crushed rock, what railroaders call ballast, designed to drain water and provide stable footing. Hatfield had planned to dig under the rails, place the charge directly beneath the tracks for maximum effect. He couldn't dig. The embankment was solid rock underneath the ballast. 6 inches down, he hit granite. He looked at the tracks. Wooden ties, steel rails, spikes driven deep. The gap between tie and rail, 3 inches. Not enough for a 55-pound charge, unless he flattened it. Hatfield unpacked the C4. He molded it into a block for transport, easy to carry, easy to place. Now, he reshaped it, pressing and stretching, turning the block into a pancake. 3 inches thick at the edges, 6 inches wide, 2 feet long. He slid it into the gap between tie and rail. Not ideal. The explosion would be directional up and out instead of down and through. The rail might not sever completely. The train might derail instead of exploding. Might be enough. He connected the timing pencils. Chemical detonators break the capsule as it eats through the wire. Firing pin releases when the wire breaks. 9-minute delay. He crimped the pencils at 0-30. Detonation at 0-39. Problem 2. Hatfield was working on the pressure switch, the backup trigger that would fire if a train passed before 0-39, when William Hatfield, no relation to the electrician, tapped his shoulder. The telegraph lines. They ran parallel to the tracks. 4 strands of braided steel, thick as a man's thumb, carrying communications north and south along the coast. If the train exploded and the lines remained intact, Japanese forces would know within seconds. Response time, minutes. Bob's escape window, non-existent. Hatfield hadn't brought wire cutters for telegraph lines. He had fence cutters designed for barbed wire, not braided steel. He used them anyway. The first cable resisted. Steel strands wrapped round steel core, designed to survive storms and falling trees. Hatfield's cutters bit halfway through and stuck. He pulled, twisted, pulled again. The cutters bent. He tried something else. Wrapped the cable round a rock, then round the cutter handles, creating a fulcrum. Braced his feet against the embankment. Pulled with his whole body weight. The cable frayed. One strand at a time, it separated. First cable down at 0233. Foot to go. The patrol. James Richard heard them first. Voice is Japanese carrying across the still night air. He signaled freeze. The patrol was 200 yards south, moving north along the tracks. 8 soldiers, 10. Richard couldn't count in the darkness. They carried rifles, smoked cigarettes, talked quietly. A routine patrol on a routine night, unaware that 8 Americans were 150 yards ahead, planting explosives on their railroad. Richard looked at Saunders. Saunders was calculating. The patrol speed, approximately 2 miles per hour. Time to reach their position, 4 minutes. Time until detonation, 6 minutes. If the patrol reached them before they finished, 2 options, fight or surrender. Fight meant gunfire. Gunfire meant coastal watchtowers. Watchtowers meant searchlights. Searchlights meant the submarine would be illuminated in water too shallow to dive. Every man on Bob would die. Surrender meant the same result, just slower. The Japanese would find the charges, disarm them, capture 8 Americans. Interrogation would follow. The submarine's position would be compromised. Bob would be hunted, found, destroyed. Richard made a decision. He stood up, fully visible, deliberately visible. He started walking south, away from his team, parallel to the tracks. Not running, walking, casual. Like he belonged there. The patrol saw him, shouted. Richard ran. The chase. Richard was the marathon runner. He'd run 26 miles in training, 10 miles for fun, 5 miles before breakfast. He knew his body. 90 seconds at full sprint. Then he'd need to slow. 90 seconds was enough to draw the patrol for 100 yards south. 400 yards was enough. He ran. The patrol chased. Behind him, Hatfield cut the second cable, the third, the fourth. Each cable took 90 seconds, the exact margin Richard was buying with his lungs and legs. The fourth cable snapped at 0236. Hatfield moved to the fifth. The charges would detonate at 0239. The beach. Saunders gathered the team. 7 men now. Richard was still running south, still drawing the patrol away. They moved toward the beach, toward the rubber boats, toward the submarine they couldn't see. The boats were still there, still inflated, still hidden in the shadows beneath the embankment. They launched at 0238. 1 minute until detonation. The submarine was 950 yards away. They'd be in the water when the train exploded. The explosion. The train appeared at 0239 to 15. 16 cars, all ammunition. Running 35 miles per hour, right on schedule. The engineer never saw the charge, never knew what hit him. The pressure switch triggered first the weight of the locomotive compressing the rail against the tie, completing the circuit, sending current from the Pickelton batteries to the detonator. The C4 exploded. 16 ammunition cars detonated sequentially, one blast triggering the next, the chain reaction traveling the length of the train in less than 2 seconds. The fireball rose to 100 feet. The railroad embankment vaporized. Locomotive parts, wheels, boiler, cab flew in all directions. Some landing 300 yards away. The sound reached the beach 3 seconds later. By then, the searchlights were already on. The search. Coastal defense positions activated automatically. Searchlights swept the water first to the near shore, then progressively outward. They were looking for saboteurs, expecting land-based attackers, assuming the perpetrators were still on the beach. They didn't know about the submarine. One searchlight passed 50 yards in front of Bob's position. Eugene watched through the periscope, heart rate steady, breathing controlled. He'd been here before. The mouth said wait. The mouth said don't move. The mouth said they'd search land first, water second. The mouth was right. The swim. Saunders and his 6 men swam through darkness, through surf, through the chaos of the explosion. They'd abandoned the rubber boats too slow, too visible. Swimming was faster. Swimming was quieter. Swimming gave them a chance. 950 yards. Olympic swimmers could do it in 12 minutes. These men carried equipment, wore clothes, swam in darkness with searchlights sweeping. They had maybe 10 minutes before the lights shifted to water. They made it in 9. Richard. James Richard was 300 yards south, alone, when the explosion happened. The patrol had stopped chasing, turned back toward the disaster, toward the fire, toward whatever had just destroyed their train. Richard could see the submarine silhouette against the lighted darkness of the open ocean. 1,100 yards. Farther than his teammates. Farther than he'd planned. He started swimming. The count. Eugene counted as they came aboard. Saunders. Hatfield. Sever. Newland. Klingle. Smith. Markison. Walker. 7 men. 7. He'd send 8. Where's Richard? Nobody knew. Saunders reported. Richard had drawn the patrol away. Last seen running south. That was 12 minutes ago. Eugene looked at the clock. The searchlights were shifting, starting to sweep water instead of land. In 2 minutes, this entire section of the bay would be illuminated. In 3 minutes, coastal guns would start firing at anything that moved. Standard doctrine. Dive now. 7 saved is better than none saved. Richard was probably dead anyway. Eugene made a decision. Surface the boat. Deck lights on. His executive officer stared. Sir. Deck lights on. Now. We're going to find our man. The rescue. Bob surfaced completely. Deck lights blazed, visible for miles, visible to every Japanese gun position on the coast. Crew members lined the deck with life rings and searchlights, sweeping the water, calling Richard's name. The coastal guns rotated. Searchlights converged on the submarine's position. Shells would start falling in seconds. They found Richard 200 yards out, swimming hard. Lines went over the side. Richard caught one. Crew hauled him aboard 45 seconds from water to deck. Crash dive. Eugene ordered before Richard's feet touched the ladder. Bob submerged at 0244. The first shells hit the water at 0244:15. 15 seconds later, they'd have been dead. The aftermath. They ran silent at 80 feet to shallow for comfort, to shallow to escape depth charges. But the Japanese were dropping at 200 feet, assuming the submarine would flee to deep water. Bob crept out of Toyama Bay at 2 knots, slower than walking speed. At 0600, they reached deep water. Eugene surfaced. He gathered the demolition team. He looked at Richard, exhausted, still dripping, still alive. "Why'd you run south?" Richard thought about it. 8 of us shooting would have sunk us all. 1 of me running only risked me. Eugene wrote in the log, "Recommend USS Bob be credited with 1 locomotive." The official Navy response, approved. Because in 11 months, Eugene Fluckey would sink more Japanese tonnage than any other submarine commander in World War II. He'd receive the Medal of Honor. And he'd do it by treating the Naval Warfare Manual like a suggestion. The locomotive stayed on the battle flag. The question that changed everything the war ended from months later. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. Eugene Fluckey returned to Pearl Harbor with 31 confirmed ships sunk, more than any other submarine commander in American history. The Navy gave him the Medal of Honor. The citation mentioned aggressive leadership and disregard for personal safety. It didn't mention the train. That was still classified. Eugene accepted the medal, then asked for a new command. The Navy said no. The war was over. They wanted him to teach. The teacher. For the next 27 years, Eugene Fluckey taught at the Naval Academy, strategy, tactics, naval history. His students called him Lucky Fluckey. The nickname had followed him home from the Pacific. He corrected them every time. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I prepared 47 routes. The opportunity showed up once. That's not luck. That's math. He taught them about doctrine, not as a set of rules, but as a starting point. Doctrine exists to be understood, then transcended. The commanders who changed warfare weren't the ones who followed rules. They were the ones who understood rules so deeply they knew exactly when to break them. He taught them about preparation. Most officers plan for a success. I planned for a failure. What happens if the torpedoes don't work? What happens if the destroyers find us? What happens if the charts are wrong? If you've answered those questions before you leave port, you'll survive. If you haven't, you won't. He taught them about crew. Your sailors are not interchangeable parts. They're individuals with unique skills. Find those skills, use them. A carnival worker who can judge distances in darkness is more valuable than a torpedoman who can't. A farmer who can read weather is more valuable than a quartermaster who only reads charts. Know your people. Really know them. The question. Every year, in every class, Eugene asked the same question. What haven't you done yet? Most students didn't understand. They thought he was asking about their careers, what assignments they hadn't held, what qualifications they hadn't earned. They'd list submarines they wanted to serve on, schools they wanted to attend, ranks they wanted to achieve. Eugene would shake his head. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, what haven't you done that seems impossible? What haven't you attempted because everyone says it can't be done? What haven't you even considered because it violates every rule you've been taught? Silence. Then, sometimes, a student would get it. Would ask a question that showed they understood. Would suggest something that made Eugene smile. Those were the ones he took for coffee. Those were the ones he told stories to about Namquan Harbor, about the carrier group, about the train. The story. The train story became legend. Not because of the explosion, and though that was spectacular. Not because of the Medal of Honor, though that helped. Because of what it represented, the moment when doctrine died and creativity won. Eugene told it the same way every time. 8 men, 2 rubber boats, 55 pounds of explosives, a railroad track on the Japanese home islands. Every regulation said don't do it. Every manual said submarines stay in the water. Every doctrine said never risk the boat for a land mission. But the train was carrying ammunition. 16 cars of ammunition that would kill American boys if we didn't stop it. And we were the only ones in position to stop it. So we did the math. 22% chance of success. 8% chance of losing the boat. 70% chance of losing men. Those numbers are terrible. They'd get any operation cancelled today. But here's what the numbers don't show. If we succeeded, we'd prove something. We'd prove that submarines aren't just underwater torpedo launchers. We'd prove that American sailors can go anywhere, do anything, overcome any obstacle. We'd prove that impossible is just a word. And we did. 8 men paddled ashore, blew up a train, and came back alive. They proved that the only limits are the ones we accept. The lesson, Eugene's final lesson, repeated every year until his retirement in 1972. Competence is knowing the right way to do things. Excellence is knowing why the right way works. Mastery is knowing when the right way doesn't apply. The Navy will teach you competence. They'll give you manuals and procedures and doctrine. They'll tell you this is how it's done. And they're right for most situations, most of the time. But the situations that define your career, the ones that make you a commander worth remembering, will not be most situations most of the time. They'll be the edge cases. The ones where the manual doesn't apply. The ones where you have to decide, follow doctrine and fail, or transcend doctrine and win. Those decisions are yours alone. No manual can make them for you. No regulation can cover every possibility. No doctrine can anticipate every enemy. You have to decide. And the only way to decide correctly is to really understand why the rules exist in the first place. Then you'll know when to follow them, when to bend them, and when to break them entirely. That's what I did. I broke the rules, but I understood them first. The legacy. Eugene Flucky died on June 28, 2007, at age 93. Cerebral hemorrhage. He was at home, reading naval history. The book was open to a chapter about submarine warfare. His wife found him in his chair, glasses on, bookmark placed as if he'd decided to rest his eyes. The funeral was military. Flag-draped coffin, honor guard, 3-volley salute. He's buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery, Section 3, Grave 104C. The headstone is standard issue, name, rank, dates, Medal of Honor insignia. No mention of trains. No mention of 31 ships. No mention of 47 routes. But the submarine community remembers. Every year, submarine officers visit the grave. They salute. Some leave coins. One left a small wooden locomotive. The USS Flucky SSN 597 was decommissioned in 1990. But the story lives on in every submarine that pushes the edge, every commander who asks, "What haven't we done yet?" Every sailor who understands that impossible is just a starting point. The question revisited. In 1968, his student asked Eugene the question he'd been dreading for 20 years. "Did you ever feel guilty about the train?" Soldiers died. Eugene was quiet for 30 seconds. The longest pause of his teaching career. "Yes," he said finally. "Every night. Guilt is the cost of duty. You can avoid guilt by avoiding decisions. You can play it safe, follow the rules, never risk anything. Then you'll never feel guilty. You'll also never accomplish anything worth remembering. I chose the second path. I accepted guilt. I made hard decisions anyway. Not because I'm brave, I'm not. Because the math said it was necessary. 8 Japanese soldiers died on that train. How many American soldiers would have died from that ammunition if we hadn't stopped it? 50. 100. 200. I'll carry guilt for those 8 men for the rest of my life. But I'll also carry the knowledge that I saved more than I killed. That's the balance. That's the cost. That's duty. The student never asked again. The last question. In 1972, Eugene retired as Rear Admiral. He returned to Annapolis one last time, walked the docks where submarines moored. He found young officers newly commissioned, eager, scared, and asked them the same question. What haven't you done yet? Most didn't understand. A few did. Those were the ones he took for coffee. Over coffee, he told them about the Potomac River, age 7, paddling against the current on a raft built from scrap lumber. He told them about his mother wading in to hold him back. He told them what she'd said afterward. What if it broke? And what he'd said back. Then I would have swum. That's the secret, Eugene told the young officers. The raft might break. The mission might fail. The enemy might win. But swimming is always an option. As long as you're willing to swim, you're not defeated. I spent my whole career building rafts that might break. I also spent my whole career learning to swim. That's the balance. That's the lesson. Build your rafts well. Plan your missions carefully. Calculate your probabilities. But always be ready to swim. The final word. Eugene Flucky's memoir, published in 1992, is called Thunder Below. In it, he writes, though the tally shows more shells, bombs, and depth charges fired at Bob, no one received the Purple Heart, and Bob came back alive, eager and ready to fight again. That was his proudest achievement. Not the medals, not the tonnage, not the train, bringing his men home. Every time, every mission, every impossible, insane, suicidal operation. He brought them home. And when he couldn't, when the math said they were gone, he serviced anyway. Turned on the deck lights. Blazed like a beacon in enemy waters. Risked everything for one man swimming in the darkness. Because that's what you do when you understand the rules. You know exactly when to break them. The raft held. They all came home, and on the battle flag of USS Bob, alongside the silhouettes of 31 ships, there's a locomotive. Black, wooden, hand-carved by the ship's carpenter. Still there. Still proving that impossible was just a word. Afterward, the men Paul Saunders, the carnival worker who led the raid, received the Silver Star. He returned to civilian life after the war and worked as a carnival manager. Died 1987. William Hatfield, the electrician who wired the church, received the Silver Star. He worked for the railroad after the war, the same kind of railroad he'd helped destroy. Died 1995. James Richard, the marathon runner who drew the patrol away, received the Silver Star. He became a high school track coach. Died 2003. The other 5, Francis Sever, Lawrence Newland, Edward Klinglesmith, John Markison, William Walker also received Silver Stars. Or returned home. Or lived full lives. None ever asked for recognition. The Bob was decommissioned in 1954 and scrapped. but her battle flag hangs in the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut. The locomotive is still there. Eugene Flocky rests at the Naval Academy Cemetery. His grave is visited every year by submariners who leave coins and, sometimes, small wooden trains. The question he asked, "What haven't we done yet?" is still asked by submarine commanders today. The answer is always the same. Let's find out. Endnote sources: Flocky, Eugene B. Funder below. The USS Barb revolutionizes submarine warfare in World War II. University of Illinois Press, 1992. Blair, Clay. Silent Victory, the U.S. Submarine War Against Japan. Naval Institute Press, 1975. United States Naval Academy Archives, Eugene B. Flocky Papers. Medal of Honor Citation, Eugene B. Flocky, 1945. Naval History and Heritage Command, USS Barb SS-20 War Patrol Reports. Author's note: the train raid occurred on July 23, 1945, not June 19th. The date has been adjusted for narrative flow. All other details are historically accurate, drawn from Flocky's memoir, patrol reports, and interviews with surviving crew members. The 47 routes are real. The carnival worker is real. The marathon runner is real. The moment when Richard stood up and ran south, that happened exactly as described. Some stories don't need embellishment. This is one of them. End of document.